Oh, hello. Welcome to my house. Today I wanted to take a little time and show how to create a useful device in Ableton Live that I call the Mother Ducker. So the first thing we need to do is to make some noise. And so I'm going to load up an 808 Core Kit device. I rigged up some claps on the 2s and the 4s. It sounds like this. Cool. And one thing I want to do for this demo is just shorten this clap because there's a little bit of room ambiance on it. And we're going to take a look with a reverb device. And so we want to exaggerate the clap versus the reverb. Okay, now we're all set. And so we can collapse the Core Kit device and let's bring in a hybrid reverb. My favorite because of convolution. That's so fun to play with. Maybe we'll do a different video on that one. And so what we want to do with the hybrid reverb is let's go full wet on the reverb now, because what we're going to do is group this with Command or Control G. When you group an effect, it creates an audio effect rack with one chain containing the devices that you grouped. We're going to rename this one FX because we're going to create a chain and rename it dry. So now we've got our dry signal back. And by structuring it this way, you have independent control over the dry volume without affecting the reverb volume, and vice versa. And so that's different than a dry wet knob, which is a crossfader between the wet and the dry, and it's always changing both when you move it. Okay, so there's a reverb, and now let's get to ducking. And so I want to introduce the powerful yet humble star of our show, the gate. And so if we drop the gate right after the reverb, all of a sudden we're not hearing the reverb anymore. And that's because currently the gate is listening to the reverb and the reverb isn't loud enough to exceed the threshold of the gate. So the gate is doing its gate thing. But instead of listening to the reverb, we want to make the gate listen to the dry signal, which is coming out of our Core Kit instrument. So we can do that by expanding the sidechain options here in the gate, enable the sidechain, audio from this track. This track is called MIDI, and by default it chooses the pre-effects, and so that's exactly what we want. That's after the instrument but before any effects take on. So now we see the shape of our input graph changing, and we can play with the threshold now and dip into it. And so now when the clap is clapping, we're hearing the reverb. Well, that's opposite of actually what we want in a ducker. Lucky us, we've got this flip control, so it inverts the behavior of the gate. And so now we're ducking, and we can play with things like the release time. You hear it fades in more slowly or more quickly. You can also control the floor, which is the amount of ducking to do in decibels. And so if you wanted to get precise about it and say, okay, I'll duck 12 dB, well, you can just dial it in on the floor there. Or set it to infinity to cut everything out as much as possible. Okay, so that's our basic duck setup. So let's assign some macro knobs to make this a more useful, reusable device for us for future tracks or future songs. So let's start out let's map the volume of the dry chain to macro 1, and we'll rename that to dry out. We'll map the output of the FX chain to macro 2, and we'll call that FX out. Macro 3, we're going to come back to macro 3. Macro 4, we start to get into the gate settings that affect the ducker. So let's do the threshold. That's number 1. The release time, I think, is the second most important, and the floor assigned to macro 6 there. So now we've got a good set of controls over how our ducker is going to behave. So coming back to macro 3, this is structured a lot like an effects send channel. So this effects chain is a lot like sending 100% of the signal into a return track, for instance, and then they're getting mixed together afterward. But the one thing we're lacking is like the send knob. And so by just adding a volume control before the effects here, that takes the place of a send knob. And so let's do that with a utility device. And we're going to put it before any effects. And we're going to map its gain knob to macro 3 and rename that to effects send. And so now we can do things like overdrive our effects and maybe compensate with the volume. And you're going to get something different out of it when you're overdriving it like that. Okay, and so final step to package this up is to name it and save it. Before we save it though, let's rename this reverb device. I'm going to just Command R here and call it replace me. Just as a reminder, you can put anything you want right here. And then we'll rename the audio effect rack to Mother Ducker. And we'll click the save button. And there we go. And there it is, all saved. So now we can drag it to a new track. And there we go. We've got another Mother Ducker with a different effects chain that you could make unique for this track. One thing that you need to make sure of is that the audio from track gets set to the current track. In Live 12, it started to default to no input instead of the current track. And so that's something you got to keep in mind. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So you just got to set that audio from track when you add it to new tracks in Live 12. Okay, well, thanks for joining me here. I hope that was informative, and I'd love to hear your feedback on this video or any of the 20 plus Macs for Live devices I've got available for free. I'll put a link to an overview page in the description of this video. So take care and hope to see you soon. Bye.